When I left Afghanistan, I wasn't just leaving a job. I was leaving behind a version of myself. The constant pressure, the uncertainty, the feeling that I always had to be on guard. What I didn't expect was that I wouldn't be making the journey alone. Before leaving Afghanistan, I met a British man. Let's call him Sean. Sean was unlike most people I had met in the Middle East. He was intelligent, caring, and surprisingly grounded considering the environment we were both living in. At the time, he was working on an escort team for Blackwater. I never asked too many questions about his work, and even if I had, I knew I probably wouldn't get the full story. That was simply the nature of the Middle East during those years. Everyone seemed to have a cover story. Everyone carried pieces of their lives they didn't discuss. I was no different. What mattered wasn't his job. What mattered was how he made me feel. For the first time in a long time, I felt seen as something other than a soldier, a contractor, or a professional chasing the next opportunity. When I received the offer in Germany, Sean agreed to come with me. At the time, I had never been to Germany. Everything about the future felt uncertain. We were in what I guess you could call a relationship. Not quite defined, not quite serious, but something was there. Instead of rushing straight to Germany, we decided to take our time. We spent several weeks traveling through Italy. After years spent in conflict zones and high-pressure environments, Italy felt like another world. The food, the scenery, the pace of life. For a little while, it felt like we had stepped outside reality, like two people trying to figure out what life could look like when survival was no longer the primary goal. Eventually, we made our way north and drove to Stuttgart. My new employer provided temporary accommodations while I searched for a permanent place to live. Before long, I found a small apartment in the countryside. The village was quiet, peaceful, the kind of place where people knew their neighbors and life moved at a slower pace. My landlady lived upstairs. She was in her 70s and reminded me of a grandmotherly figure. After everything I had experienced over the previous few years, the simplicity of that life felt comforting. For the first time in a very long time, I felt like I could exhale. I started settling into my new job. I learned my surroundings. I established routines. And little by little, Germany began to feel like home. Sean's original plan was simple. Stay a few weeks, spend time together, then return to Afghanistan. But plans have a way of changing. As the weeks passed, Sean began talking about staying longer. Then longer became permanent. Before I knew it, he had decided to remain in Germany. He talked about building a future together, starting over, creating a new life. At the time, it sounded wonderful. After years of constant movement, uncertainty, and reinvention, the idea of stability was appealing. Maybe this was what I'd been searching for. A peaceful life, a meaningful career, a relationship with someone who understood where I had been and what I had experienced. For the first time, I allowed myself to imagine a future that looked different from my past. I allowed myself to believe that maybe life was finally settling down. But sometimes the things that appear promising in the beginning reveal themselves slowly. And sometimes the life we imagine isn't the life we're actually building. What started as a hopeful new chapter in Germany would eventually take a turn neither of us expected. The story, however, was only just beginning. In the next episode, I'll share how my relationship with Sean changed after we settled into life in Germany and why what seemed like a fresh start became one of the most important lessons of my life.